2 days ago, on the 10th of August, the Department for Education confirmed what student loans will cost from the 1st of September. The headline is straightforward. For Plan 2 and Plan 3 loans, the maximum interest rate is capped at 6% for the year. Without the cap, it would have been the retail price index plus 3%, which for this period is 7.1. So, a lower rate. Reported reasonably as good news for graduates. And in the House of Commons Library's own briefing on student loans, there is a sentence that explains why, for most graduates, it will make no difference whatsoever to what they actually pay. It says, interest rates on student loans affect only a borrower's total loan balance. They do not affect how much a borrower must repay each month. That is not a caveat buried in a footnote. That is how the system works, and once you understand it, almost everything people believe about student loans turns out to be describing a different product entirely. So let me tell you where we are going. First, what actually comes out of your salary, which is not what most people think. Then, what the balance on your statement is really for. Then, the one group for whom the interest rate matters enormously, which is not the group you would guess. And finally, why this thing is called a loan at all, when it behaves like something else. Let's start with the repayment. If you are on a Plan 2 loan in England, you repay 9% of everything you earn above a threshold. That threshold is currently £29,385. Not 9% of your salary, 9% of the part above the threshold. So take somebody earning £32,000. The amount above the threshold is £2,615. 9% of that is about £235 a year, under £20 a month. Now here is the part that matters. That figure does not change if you owe £30,000. It does not change if you owe £60,000. It does not change if your balance grew by £3,000 in interest last year. The calculation only looks at your income. The balance is not an input. So two graduates on identical salaries, one owing £30,000 and one owing £70,000, pay exactly the same amount every month. Every month for as long as they are repaying. Read that again because it is the whole thing. Your loan balance does not determine your repayment. Your salary does. Which means that when a headline says interest rates on student loans have been cut, what has actually been cut is the speed at which a number grows. A number that, for most people, is not connected to anything they will ever pay. Now I can hear the obvious objection, and it is a good one. Surely the balance matters eventually. You have to pay it off in the end. And for most graduates, the answer is no, you do not. Because the loan is written off. Plan 2 loans are cancelled 30 years after the April you became due to repay. Whatever is left at that point simply ceases to exist. So the question is not whether your balance is large, it is whether you will clear it before the write-off arrives. And for a large proportion of graduates, the honest answer is that they will not, and everybody involved knows they will not. The system is designed on that assumption. The IFS models it explicitly. One of its analyses discusses the share of borrowers expected to fully repay and what happens to that share under different policies. If you are not going to clear the balance, then the balance is not a debt you will pay. It is a ceiling you will never reach. And a lower interest rate lowers a ceiling you were never going to touch. So who does it help? This is where it gets genuinely counterintuitive, and it is the part almost nobody gets right. Interest rates matter to the graduates who will clear their loans. That is, on the whole, the highest earners. Somebody on a large salary repays quickly, clears the balance inside the 30 years, and every pound of interest charged along the way is a pound they actually hand over. For that person, 6% versus 7.1% is real money. For somebody earning £32,000, paying under £20 a month toward a balance that will be written off in their 50s, it is a change to a number on a statement. I want to be careful here because that reasoning can be pushed into somewhere silly. It does not follow that interest is irrelevant to lower earners. There is a middle group, people who will clear their loan, but only just, in year 26 or 28, for whom the interest rate decides whether they finish early or run to the wire. For them, it matters a great deal. And the IFS has pointed out something else worth stating. In one of its analyses, a lower interest rate produced almost no change in lifetime repayments among the fifth of graduates with the lowest lifetime earnings. Because for those graduates, a lower rate simply reduces the amount that gets written off at the end. Written off by the government. Which means a reduction in the interest rate on the loans of the lowest earning graduates is, in effect, a saving to the Treasury rather than to the graduate. That is not a criticism of the policy. Capping the rate at 6% is a reasonable thing to do, and it genuinely helps some people. It is just not, for most graduates, the thing it sounds like. And here is where the whole thing turns over. We call this a loan. It has a balance, an interest rate, a statement, and a company that administers it. Every feature of it is borrowed from lending. But look at what it actually does. You pay a fixed percentage of your income above a threshold. You pay it for a set number of years. If you earn nothing, you pay nothing. If you earn a lot, you pay a lot. At the end of the period, whatever is outstanding disappears. That is not the behaviour of a loan. That is the behaviour of a tax. A graduate tax, specifically. 9% on earnings above £29,385 for 30 years levied on people who went to university. And I do not mean that as a rhetorical flourish. Consider how you would answer a practical question. If you got a pay rise, would your student loan repayment go up? Yes, immediately. If you paid off a chunk of the balance, would your monthly repayment go down? No, not by a penny. That is a tax. Whatever it is called, whatever the statement says, that is the mechanism. If you are finding this useful, that is what this channel is. Every figure from a named source, working out why things cost what they cost and who ends up paying. Subscribing is how you get the next one. So why is it called a loan? And why does the statement show a balance at all? Partly accounting. A loan sits on the government's books differently from a tax, and the distinction has real consequences for how public borrowing is measured. But partly because a balance changes how people behave, and that is the more interesting effect. A 23-year-old with a statement saying they owe £50,000 does not experience it as a 9% marginal rate. They experience it as debt. It affects how they think about their future, whether they feel able to take a risk, how they answer when a mortgage advisor asks what they owe, and the anxiety attached to that number is entirely real, even where the number itself functions like a tax band. I am not going to pretend that is trivial. A generation has been handed a figure that looks like the largest debt of their lives, told it is a debt, and then told, when they complain, that it is not really a debt and they should stop worrying about it. Both of those things are being said by the same system. There is also a real second deduction that people forget about. Postgraduate loans, Plan 3, repay at 6% of income above £21,000, and somebody with both an undergraduate Plan 2 loan and a postgraduate loan faces both deductions once their income crosses the relevant thresholds. 9% above £29,385 plus 6% above £21,000. That is a substantial marginal rate stacked on top of income tax and national insurance, and it lands on people in their late 20s who did a master's. And then there is the freeze, which is the thing in this story that will actually cost graduates money. The Plan 2 threshold rose to £29,385 in April 2026. Announced at the 2025 budget, it is then frozen at that level for 3 years from April 2027. Now think about what a frozen threshold does while wages rise. Every year, the average earnings go up and the threshold does not, more of your salary sits above it. So the amount you repay increases even if your real income has not. That is exactly the same mechanism as fiscal drag in the income tax system, which is a much better known idea. Freeze a threshold, let inflation and wage growth carry people over it, and you collect more without ever announcing a rate rise. So the two pieces of news sit oddly together. A capped interest rate, which mostly affects a balance many graduates will never clear, and a frozen repayment threshold, which directly increases what comes out of a payslip every month. The first was announced as help for graduates. The second is what will actually change the number on the payslip. So what should you take from this? If you are repaying a student loan, one practical thing. Before you consider paying off a lump sum voluntarily, work out whether you are realistically going to clear the balance before write-off. If you are not, paying extra means handing over money you were never going to be asked for. If you are, high earner, long career ahead, clearing it comfortably inside 30 years, then it can make sense, and the interest rate genuinely matters to you. That is not advice about your particular circumstances, and the honest answer for most people is that it depends on a forecast of their whole working life, which nobody has. But the more useful thing is the general point, and it is not really about students. When a charge is dressed in the language of a different kind of charge, people reason about it wrongly. Not because they are careless, but because the language tells them which mental model to use, and the model is wrong. Called a loan, this thing produces anxiety about a balance, guilt about not repaying, and a strong instinct to clear it. All responses that make perfect sense for a debt and mostly do not apply here. Call a tax, it would produce a completely different conversation. People would argue about the rate, the threshold, and how long it lasts, which are the three things that actually determine what anyone pays. We have spent 2 decades having the first conversation. The number that changed this month, the one that made the headlines, belongs to the first conversation. The frozen threshold belongs to the second one, and almost nobody reported it at all.